Good afternoon and welcome to NASA headquarters here in Washington, D.C. for today's town hall meeting with Bobby Braun. I'm Dave Steeds from NASA's Office of Communications. Today, Bobby is going to talk to us a little bit about his office and the role of technology in the future of NASA. Bobby was named to the position of NASA Chief Technologist on February 1 by Administrator Charlie Bolden. He's a professor of aerospace engineering at Georgia Tech. Before joining Georgia Tech, Bobby worked for 16 years at NASA's Langley Research Center in Hampton, Virginia. He's a graduate of Penn State and holds a master's degree in astronautics from George Washington University and a doctorate in aeronautics and astronautics from Stanford. During Bobby's talk, he's going to be addressing some slides that you're going to see on television. You can also download those slides from our website, which is at www.nasa.gov/offices/oct/index.html. It's a long URL, I apologize, but it may be more helpful if you go to that website, nasa.gov/offices/oct/index.html to look at the slides as Bobby talks to them. Following his comments, we'll take questions from here at NASA headquarters and from participating NASA centers. Bobby?
Great, thank you. Thanks. And thank you all for taking some time out of your day to join me here today and talk about, there's a little feedback there, no? Okay. And talk about a topic that I'm pretty excited about, the technology programs at NASA. Can we go to the next slide, please? I'm not going to refer directly to every slide, just so you know. I wanted to prepare the slides and have them for you for your later reference. And you could download them off the internet at the site that was spoken. In the back, can you hear me okay, or do I need to be a little louder? Louder. Okay, I'm going to stand up then. This is a slide that I put together to kind of address overall the NASA budget, the President's FY11 budget request. And there's a lot of different points on this slide that talk about the increase in the President's budget over the 5-year period for NASA, which, by the way, I think of as a big deal, that talk about the increase for science and aeronautics in particular, the change or the shift in our approach to human exploration. But really what I want to focus in on here today is one particular aspect of the President's FY11 budget request, and that's the significant focus on technology development. As the Chief Technologist, this is something you would probably expect that I would focus in on. This is something that you might expect that I'm excited about. But I want to explain to you a little bit about why I'm excited about it and why I think this is a big deal. First of all, there is a significant focus on technology development in the President's budget request. That focus actually is across the federal government. It's not just a NASA thing, okay? Across the federal government, there's a significant theme in the President's FY11 budget, which is a focus on increasing research and development across the federal agencies. And that increase in research and development is there because of the impact that the administration believes that investment will create, frankly, on the economy, on technology-oriented jobs, and on our nation's economic competitiveness in the future. For NASA, that's important because it means that we can consider a more productive and vital aeronautics and space future as we move forward. But for the nation, it's also important for some of these other reasons. And I think it's very important to realize that at the outset. Now, within NASA, this focus on technology development shows itself both in the Exploration Systems Mission Directorate, where there are a large number of technology programs that are under formulation as part of the new plan, and within a new budget line called Space Technology. And it's that new budget line, Space Technology, which is going to be managed out of the Office of Chief Technologist, that I'm going to focus on primarily today. And at the top line, that's about $5 billion over 5 years. Next slide, please. Now, you might wonder, and actually when I go around the country, I've been asked many times, where did this focus on technology come from? By the way, you don't need to read this slide. It's okay. You can download it later. Okay. Where did this focus on technology come from? Is this something the administration just came up with overnight or in a brief period of time? Well, in actuality, it's not correct. Okay? This shift, or this focus on technology, is something that many of us within NASA have discussed for a long time. Right? If you go back to the Space Act and you think about the three fundamental, long-standing core competencies that make NASA the special place that it is, and I honestly believe that NASA is a very special organization within the federal government, there are three things that jump out at you, at least jump out at me when I think about NASA. One of those is a research and technology competency. The second is a flight hardware development competency. And the third is mission operations, also a critical, long-standing core competency of NASA. And in fact, it's those three things together that I think make NASA the unique place it is, that allow NASA to go and do things that, frankly, other government agencies can't, and that our nation expects NASA to be able to do, both in aeronautics and space. And you can imagine that if any one of those three long-standing core competencies was removed, NASA wouldn't be the unique place that it is today. And that's true if you were to remove the research and technology core competency. It's also true if you were to remove the flight hardware development or the mission operations core competency. All three of these legs of a stool, if you will, are required for NASA to be the place that it is. And it's no secret that over the past decade or so, the research and technology competency at NASA has been down. People within the agency have recognized that, and people external to the agency have recognized that. And what this slide shows is a list of high-level reports compiled by the NRC, the National Research Council. Actually, there are 4 NRC reports listed on here, by the Augustine Committee, and in fact, in the NASA Authorization Act of 2008. And these 6 documents, all of which were produced since 2008, so they're 2008, 2009, and 2010 documents. They're all relatively recent. They all say effectively the same thing. They say that NASA needs to get back to its roots as a research and development organization. Not entirely, but we need to lift up that research and technology competency, and we need to make it visible again. They say that without such a competency, the missions that NASA goes after in the future will not be as far-reaching as they could be. The sustainability of our robotic and human exploration endeavors will not be what it could be. And frankly, the impact to society and to the nation will not be what it could be. So I'm not going to quote you from any of these 6 different reports, but I'll leave it to you to look at them later. But they all, generally speaking, they all say that type of content. Next slide, please. There are a lot of ways for me to convey the importance of technology investments, right? And believe me, technology investments are important to our science missions, they're important to our aeronautics missions, and they're important to our future human exploration endeavors. Perhaps the most dramatic way is with this slide, which illustrates the amount of mass required in low Earth orbit, not on the ground, but assembled in low Earth orbit, at the beginning of a human Mars mission, a mission to emplace people on the surface of Mars and return them safely to the Earth. And the reason that this slide is so significant to me is it's plotted on the y-axis. I know it might be a little challenging to see in this room, but it's plotted on the y-axis in units of International Space Station mass. So down at the bottom in that little image is the International Space Station, complete at one International Space Station mass. And up at the top of that scale are numbers like 12. Okay? And with our existing technologies, if we were to try to send humans to the surface of Mars today, it would take us, it depends a little bit on when you launch and what kind of assumptions you make, but it would take us something like 12 International Space Stations in low Earth orbit, all put together in one vehicle, or 2 vehicles, to send humans to Mars to the surface and return them safely. Now, humans to Mars, by the way, is a grand challenge. Okay? And so these numbers are perhaps a little bit increased because it's such a grand challenge. And we can certainly send humans to other destinations, for instance, a near-Earth asteroid, or into orbit about Mars, as the President discussed in his April 15th speech at the Kennedy Space Center, without these dramatic mass implications. But the president did also say that in his lifetime, he'd like to send humans to Mars. And I know our administrator shares that goal, and actually I personally share that goal. It's something that many of us in the agency are interested in. Now imagine taking a story to Congress that says we need to assemble 12 international space stations in low Earth orbit so we can start our human Mars exploration missions. You can imagine the reception you're going to get. Now what this slide shows graphically is that as we invest in technologies, and there are a number of them listed on here, things like cryogenic boil-off, advanced in-space propulsion, aero capture, those types of technologies. As we invest in a number of technologies, we can bring the required number of international space stations down to something like 2. Okay? Now at 2 ISSs, sending humans to Mars is still a grand challenge. It's not a done deal. It's not something we can bank on, so to speak. But at least at 2, or somewhere in that neighborhood, we can have the conversation. We can discuss it rationally in the government, and we can make a decision about one day sending humans to the surface of Mars. And to me, that's the power, if you will, of technology investments. Okay? Next slide. So based on the external input that was gathered, the president submitted his budget request. And in February of this year, actually on February 1st of this year, I started here at NASA headquarters, my second stint within NASA. And we've been building something called the Office of the Chief Technologist. It's a new organization here at headquarters. It's very important to realize it's not a mission directorate. I am not a mission directorate associate administrator. I'm just the chief technologist. And the Office of the Chief Technologist has a number of goals and responsibilities, and they're listed on this slide. Our number one responsibility is to serve the administrator. We are the principal advisor and advocate for Administrator Bolden on agency-wide technology programs and policy matters. That includes communications out, beyond the agency, up and out advocacy for NASA's research and technology programs, and that includes within the agency communication and integration with other agency technology efforts. And by the way, there are agency technology efforts that are very important within all the mission directorates. Okay? And OCT by no way replaces a mission directorate's technology programs. Instead, what we're doing is we're responsible for integrating across these different technology programs. And number 3 on this list, for direct management of a new technology line called the Space Technology Program that I'll go into in more detail. So we're responsible for coordinating, integrating, when there are issues, prioritizing the technology investments across the agency. And these include both the mission-focused technology programs within the mission directorates and the more cross-cutting or non-mission focused efforts within space technology. Also, we're responsible for documenting, communicating, and demonstrating the societal impact of NASA's technology investments. Next slide, please. I've had a great team here at NASA headquarters over the last few months, and I really should call out the folks on that team individually. The folks on this team have started from within the IPP, the Innovative Partnership Program, and we've added to that details. Folks from every center have come in the last few months to help me formulate FY11 plans, fiscal year 11 plans, for the new technology programs at NASA. And this slide describes kind of at a high level, it's called NASA's Integrated Technology Programs. This slide describes at a high level the full suite of technology programs at NASA. And what I want you to realize is a couple things about these programs. First of all, they span the entire technology readiness level spectrum, all the way from concepts and paper studies, what you might call TRL 1, 2 kind of things, through ground-based testing and laboratory testing, TRL 3, 4-ish kind of things, to flight testing, getting our technologies proven in a relevant environment, TRL 6, and up and infused into new missions within the Science Mission Directorate, within the Aeronautics Mission Directorate, and within the Exploration Systems Mission Directorate. Now, there are 2 kinds of technology programs within the agency as of this time. There's what I would call technology pull programs, and these are technology programs where requirements for the technology investments are flown down from the missions. These are the kinds of things that the mission directorates do well, frankly, and have done for a number of years. Right? Given a set of goals, and for ESMD, I should point out, the President enunciated a very clear set of goals, dates and destinations, right? When he said our new generation crewed exploration vehicle will have early test flights in the Earth system in the early part of the next decade. We'll go out to a near-Earth asteroid in 2025, and then we'll go into orbit about Mars, returning humans safely in 2035, landing on the surface at some subsequent time. He didn't give a specific date for that one. But with those goals, those dates and destinations, you can imagine that the mission directorates can populate mission architectures, they can figure out what kind of spacecrafts they need, and they can flow that down into technology requirements. In fact, that's what the HEF team, the Human Exploration Frameworks team, has been doing since they got stood up a couple months ago. And the mission directorates, as I said, are very good, I think, at doing that. But there's a different kind of technology investment program that you might consider that we need, in fact, that I believe that we do need. So if each of the mission directorates are doing technology pull, or a requirements flow down approach, think about the space technology program within the Office of the Chief Technologist, an office that is not a mission directorate. Think about that as a technology push organization, an organization that's going to focus on cross-cutting or grand challenges and solicit technologies to sponsor that fulfill those grand challenges. Okay? If you're going to invest in the future in a technology-enabled way, and you don't know precisely what technologies are required, and I would say that because our missions, some of our missions are relatively far off. We're talking about going to an asteroid or to send humans to Mars. Right? We may have a baseline set of technologies that we think we need, but do we know with 100% certainty that if we make this investment, we can accomplish that mission? Probably not. So there are some alternate pathways or some disruptive technologies that we'd like to infuse in our missions. Anybody have a cell phone? I know they told you to turn them off, right? So you must have them. Right? Well, a cell phone is a great everyday example of a disruptive technology. A decade ago, did you have a cell phone? Probably not. But today, you probably feel attached to your cell phone, more attached to your cell phone than to some people that you might meet, right? In fact, here at NASA headquarters, I see people walking in the halls, in meetings, constantly on their cell phone, doing email and all kinds of things like that. Cell phones have changed the way we do business, right? And that's what I'm calling a disruptive technology. We can have those same kind of breakthroughs in our space and aeronautics programs as well. And through investments in the space technology program, I believe that we will. Next slide, please. So this is the organization that we've formed, the Office of the Chief Technologist organization. And this office, I should mention, reports directly to the administrator. And it's staffed by myself as the Chief Technologist and Rick Howard, who couldn't be in the room here today, as the Deputy Chief Technologist. And we have a number of functions at the top that you would expect of any organization, including a communications function, a financial function. We have a strategic integration function, which will be where the responsibility will be for integrating the technology programs across the agency. And we have a partnerships function that includes a strong commercial aspect. And that office will be responsible for building partnerships in all of these pursuits, much like, by the way, the IPP program had been doing over the past few years. Down at the bottom on this slide, you see three major divisions. There's an early stage innovation division, a game-changing technology division, and a cross-cutting capability demonstration division. If you think in technology readiness level terminology, the early stage innovation is all the concept work, the paper studies, the brainstorming, the visions of the future, right? And so that's the TRL 1-2 kind of work, and there are a number of programs in there. In fact, there are 5 programs within early stage innovation, and I'll talk a little bit more about those later. Within game changing, there are 2 programs, and within cross-cutting capability demonstration, which is where we're taking things to flight hardware development, to testing in a flight relevant environment, excuse me, there are 3 programs. Total of 10 programs across the organization. Next slide, please. I think I'm just going to breeze over this slide because I actually put it in there for your reference later on. The one point I do want to make is that this program is set up largely in a way to attract the best ideas from wherever those ideas may come. This includes ideas from industry, from academia, from within NASA itself, from other national labs. And the way we're going to get those ideas is largely through a competitive process. This process is being modeled based on the successful competitive processes that SMD has run for a number of years. It'll be different because it's technology and not science, but think of the same type of mechanisms, if you will, for this competitive process. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the word grand challenges, okay? And grand challenges are important if you're interested in the space technology program. The reason that grand challenges are important is because we obviously don't want to just put out a call for technology, right? Imagine if we put out a call for technology. Think of all the hundreds of thousands of responses we might get and how difficult it would be to actually sort the good responses from the not so good responses. Okay? So instead of just a generic, we're interested in technology, that's not what this program is. It's been reported that way, I must point out. This is not a just invest in technology and see what happens kind of program. The way the program is going to be run is very much like DARPA. So DARPA or ARPA-E would be another example. They set grand challenges. They don't specify the technological solution that they're seeking. They specify a capability that they would like to get to in a certain number of years. And they put that capability out there, and then folks respond with a range of technological solutions. And often, DARPA or ARPA-E will fund many of those teams. They'll fund many of those technological solutions for a few years, and then they'll down select to the most viable approach and carry that approach all the way up to flight. That's the kind of program that we're talking about here in space technology. Next slide, please. Graphically, you can think of it this way. All right? We have the visions of the future. We have thousands of concepts, paper studies, analyses, technology assessments that might be done from within the early stage innovation division. By the way, I've worked on a lot of these systems analyses myself, and I'll tell you, these things always look good on paper, right? And there's always just one little problem. There's this little bit of physics, right, off in the corner that you have to prove. And if that little bit of physics could be made to work, the rest of the concept always looks great, right? Always going to save cost. It's always going to save time. It's always going to save mass, okay? That little bit of physics, that's what we're going to go after in the game-changing division, okay? And this is a big difference. This is a big thing for NASA. In the past, we've had concept groups, and we've actually had flight program, technology-oriented flight programs. But we've never, in my view, had that focus on the middle, on proving the fundamental physics of a concept before we took it to flight, okay? And so the game-changing division is very important, in my view, for this reason. In game-changing, we're going to focus through ground-based testing, through laboratory testing, things like that, on a smaller number, not hundreds, but a smaller number of the visions of the future. We're going to try to prove those fundamental physics, and when we do, we're going to take those things and pass them off to the cross-cutting capability demonstration division for testing in a relevant environment, maybe in low Earth orbit, maybe an atmospheric flight test, depends exactly on the system that we're talking about. But at the end of that process, that technology will be at a TRL of 6. It will be demonstrated in a relevant environment. It will be flight ready and ready for infusion in a future science or exploration or aeronautics mission. And in fact, we're going to work with those mission directorates throughout this process to make sure that they're aware and ready for that handoff. We're not just going to throw it over the fence, if you will. Next slide, please. So a little more detail on each of these 3 divisions, and then I'll wrap up. The Early Stage Innovation Division, I mentioned, sponsors a wide range of low technology readiness level efforts, advanced space system concepts, initial technology readiness assessments across academia, industry, other government agencies, in partnership with other government agencies, and certainly with our NASA field centers. There are 5 programs. The Space Technology Research Grant Program, I view that as a space equivalent, if you will, to fundamental aeronautics that AirMD runs today. Okay? It's a grant type or a foundational research type of program focused on space technology. It also includes a large fellowship program in which we will engage several hundred university students across the country, both in research at their universities, graduate research at their universities, and summer research at a NASA center. Early stage innovation includes reestablishment of the NIAC, what was the NASA Institute for Advanced Concepts. This program previously was only open to folks external to NASA. In the new NIAC, it will be open both to ideas from within and external to NASA. There'll be a Center Innovation Fund. This will be a fund that will be distributed to each of the NASA centers and will be managed locally, either by the center director or, if they designate it, to the chief technologist at each center, be managed by those chief technologists. And the centers will use these funds to stimulate within their center and in partnership with folks outside creativity and innovation seed fund, basically. You can think of it as an expanded IPP seed fund. Fourth, we have the SBIRS TTR program, and fifth, the Centennial Challenges program. Both of those existed in IPP previously and are carried forward into the new Office of the Chief Technologist. One key facet about early stage innovation, remember, we're looking for the best ideas wherever they may be, and so within this division, it is 100% competed. All of the awards are made through various means of competition. Next slide, please. Game-changing technology. This is where we're going after that fundamental physics that I mentioned earlier, typically in ground-based testing or lab testing. There are 2 programs here. One is called the Game-Changing Development Program. This program is going to have a Level 2 office. I should have mentioned the Level 2 offices on the other slide. I apologize. This office is going to have a Level 2 office at Langley. The Game-Changing Development Program is going to focus on innovative ideas or new capabilities that could radically, dramatically, disruptive technologies, right? Could dramatically impact a future NASA mission. Also, there's a small satellite subsystem technology program, which is going to have a Level 2 program office at NASA Ames. And this office is going to focus on small sat, as the name implies, small sat subsystem investments that could enable these small sats to provide unique functions for government or commercial users. This program has some directed efforts, but will be over 70% competed. Not the program, but this division. Next slide, please. Within cross-cutting, this is where we're going to take a small number of things, small number of technologies, and demonstrate them in a flight-relevant environment. So we're going to take things up to TRL 6. By the way, the most successful cross-cutting demonstration program that I can think of in NASA's past is probably the New Millennium program within SMD that I believe is on its way out. This program will, in some ways, replace the New Millennium program. In some ways, it'll be a greatly augmented New Millennium program. There are 3 programs within cross-cutting. The first is technology demonstration missions. This is where the largest projects within OCT will reside. So the largest technology demonstrators, those that are required maybe to be tested in the atmosphere or tested in low Earth orbit, they'll reside within that program. The Level 2 program office here is at the Marshall Space Flight Center. The Edison Small Satellite Missions program is also within this division. Edison is where we're going to take, the Level 2 program office for that is at NASA Ames. Edison is where we're going to take and actually implement some small sat missions for NASA. You may know that the Air Force has a small sat program, NSF has a small sat program. Edison is going to be NASA's equivalent, if you will, to those programs. and will be planned in collaboration, not redundant to, but in collaboration with those existing programs. Finally, flight opportunities is the merging of two previous IPP programs, FAST and Cruiser, which basically are procuring services, procuring flight services, either aircraft or suborbital flight services, for technology demonstrations, for educational payloads, and one day for science payloads. And so those three programs, by the way, Flight Opportunities has a Level 2 program office at the Dryden Flight Research Center. Those three programs make up Crosscutting, and overall Crosscutting is about 70% or more competed. Next slide, please. Well, what will this investment bring? It's hard to answer that question, to be honest. And the reason that it's hard to answer that question is because I'm talking about competition. I'm talking about gathering the best ideas from wherever they may come, and I don't have those ideas yet. In fact, I'm counting on many of you for those ideas. But I can give you some suggestions of the kinds of things that could come from this program. And this slide here gives a few examples. I want you to note that these systems have, if you go back and look at NASA's technology reports or NASA's mission reports and what technologies are required by our future science or our future exploration missions, many of these are on the list and have been for some time. Okay? Aero capture systems or inflatable decelerators that would allow us to go into orbit about planets with atmospheres in a more effective way or deliver more mass to the surface of a planet. Large space structures that are deployed or assembled either for science purposes or exploration purposes are another example of such systems. And there are plenty more, and we could maybe get into talk about those a little bit more later on. Next slide, please. I'm going to skip over this slide. I just wanted you to have the budget information, so it's in the package that's on the internet. The one thing I do want to say about the budget is it's advertised as being about $5 billion over 5 years. When you get into the details of the budget and you include for the fact that the SBIR program, which I think is very important and we need to certainly needs to be included along with these other technology programs, but the budget for the SBIR program is congressionally mandated. And so the overall budget for space technology, at least the budget that I can adjust, if you will, is really closer to about $3.5 billion over the 5-year period. And the breakout among the programs is shown on this slide. Next slide, please. I mentioned the formulation team that's come here to NASA headquarters, includes headquarters people and folks from all the centers. I want you to know that team has been working hard and has put in some fairly detailed plans for how this program is going to run. I've been reviewing these plans, and I think they're very good. This program is being constructed in a logical, executable manner, one in which we will bring in innovation and ideas from the outside, and we will make those ideas, we will make those concepts a reality. There are a couple of RFIs that have already been released for this program. There are a couple more that are going to come out this week. There's one this week that's going to come out for technology demonstration missions and also for the Edison small-sat missions. And as we move forward in the summer, this team is prepared, should we be given authority by Congress and others, we're prepared to release formal RFPs and AOs at such a time as it is warranted. Of course, with the debate going on with the budget, realizing that what I'm talking about, of course, is the President's budget request, and that request has to be approved by Congress, and that approval has not occurred yet. Obviously, no awarding of funds would be made until such a time as budget approval is received. But the team has been moving, and the team is ready to implement this program. Next slide, please. I do want to point out just a couple of other things about the way we're running the program. We've stood up, to govern our technology investments, we've stood up 2 new councils, and this has been an approved governance model, approved through the agency at this point. One is called the NASA Technology Executive Council. It consists of myself and Mike Ruszkiewicz, the agency chief engineer, and the associate administrators for each of the 4 mission directorates. And this is the forum where we're going to integrate our technology programs and deal with any discrepancies if they arise. We also have the Center Technology Council. The first, at least telecon of that council occurred yesterday. The first face-to-face meeting of both of these councils will be in June. And the Center Technology Council is the collection of the center chief technologists. I've asked for, and each of the center directors has appointed a chief technologist, basically my primary interface at their center. And those center chief technologists have been and are going to be very engaged in both the formulation and the execution, the implementation of this program. And we're going to do that through the Center Technology Council. Next slide. My last slide, I just wanted to summarize. I want to make a couple points, and then I'll open it up to questions. First of all, I want to point out that through the FY11 budget request, the Obama administration made their intent very well known, right? And what their intent and focused on is a commitment to research, technology, and innovation. You can look across the federal government and you can see this. All the agencies that had a research and technology component got an increase, even in the discretionary budget that was held fixed. NASA included in that increase. And those that didn't took a decrease to pay for those agencies that got an increase. What a blessing it is, frankly, that NASA got an increase in this environment where discretionary spending was held fixed. In my personal opinion, and I'll admit that I started on February 1st, so I wasn't here in Washington when these deliberations were occurring. But in my personal opinion, NASA would not have gotten the increase that it received without a focus on research, technology, and innovation. Okay? The Obama administration is committed to that because of what they believe it means for our nation's future economy, for building economic competitiveness in this country, to interact with global markets, to create new products and services, to create new industries and high-quality, technology-oriented jobs. NASA's budget request is aligned with this national strategy. This is also awesome, okay? NASA's budget is aligned with a national initiative. That doesn't always occur either, I want to point out. NASA is being treated as a major part of the Obama administration's research, technology, and innovation focus. It's a great opportunity for our agency. And just as importantly, this renewed emphasis on technology in the President's FY11 budget request, what it really does, in my view, is it brings up the research and technology competency, this long-standing competency within the agency that had been down for over a decade. It brings it up and makes it visible again and makes it a partner with the flight system hardware and mission operation competencies of NASA. In my view, making NASA a healthy organization. In addition to providing a more vital and productive aerospace future through these investments, you should also realize that a NASA focused on technology and innovation has some big impacts for our country. It will drive our nation's economic competitiveness through the aerospace sector. NASA will be able to continue to serve, I should say, as a strong inspiration for students and others interested in educational and career pathways in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And just as important, I think it will allow some number of researchers at the NASA field centers to apply the intellectual capital that they work every day in aerospace on, to apply some of that to some major societal challenges in energy, the environment, weather, health and wellness, and certainly national security. These are all areas that, NASA's not going to lead these areas, but these are all areas that NASA's intellectual capital can contribute to if asked. And these are, frankly, this set of things is the reason that I'm excited about this budget. I think I'll stop there and see if there are any questions.
Okay, thanks, Bobby. We'll take questions from here at headquarters, and then we'll go around to the NASA centers. If you have a question here, just raise your hand and wait for a microphone, and we'll get started here.
Hello, Mike Wright, Goddard Space Flight Center. Couple of parts to this question. One is, what is NASA doing to partner with other agencies to avoid, say, reinventing the wheel with regards to not only technologies that we could benefit in our mission, but also that those other agencies, maybe there's something we have that could benefit those other agencies as well. And secondly, I think it's fair to say that the talents and skills that scientists and engineers within the agency have that make them good idea generators, that make them visionaries, aren't also the same skills that allow them to write really good proposals and compete in that process. What is the OCT doing to help facilitate that process so that there might be some good ideas out there, but they just don't have the right buzzwords to get, to get that attention?
Great. Two very good questions. So first of all, partnerships. Partnerships across the federal government are increasingly important. There's no fuzz on this statement. The Obama administration is pushing all of the agencies to work together. And we're all incentivized, I'd say, to do so. I can pick up the phone and call my counterpart at DARPA or at ARPA-E or at a number of organizations, and they'll answer. In fact, in my first week here, I had 2 meetings at DARPA. In my second week here, I had one with the ARPA-E director, just as an example. And we are pursuing a number of collaborative opportunities. Some of these competitive solicitations will actually be co-sponsored, and we're also starting to coordinate. We have a long way to go. I'll admit that. There are a large number of agencies, and it's a big problem. But we are directly addressing that issue. Your second question about proposals, we're also working on. I have no intention of creating a system that requires $1 million investment in proposal generation to win 100K. Okay? So there are a couple ways we can do that. We can streamline the proposal process. We can request 1 or 2 page proposals for early stage innovation things. More, 10-page, I'm making up these numbers, okay? Don't quote me on them. 10-page proposals for game-changing kind of things. And the bigger, think of them as full mission proposals in the SMD speak, for technology demonstration missions. So we can tailor the proposal process. The other thing I would say is if the proposal selection process is skewed towards buzzwords, then we've done a bad job. Okay, so the other big part of that is peer review and how we do peer review. Who's qualified to do peer review, and making sure that the peer review burden is appropriate and not overly cumbersome, right? And that's something else that we're working. We're getting a lot of good advice, I should point out, from the mission directorates that have done some of this in the past. And we're modeling our efforts largely on their processes, but we are tweaking it some because it's a different focus than NASA has applied in the past. But those are very good points. I don't have the final answer on that, but I will tell you that we're working it hard. And by the way, if you have more input on that, I would suggest that you either email me or give it to your center chief technologist, and I'm sure they'll deliver it to me. Yes, ma'am.
We have one more up here in the back.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, Bobby.
Hey.
I have a quick question. You mentioned in your early stage innovation process that I think, quote, we're looking for the best ideas. The question I have is, who and how is it determined what is the best idea?
Yeah, that's good. So that goes right into peer review, right? So so it depends exactly on what, best idea depends a little bit on which program that we're talking about, okay? But if we just pick a program, for example, like the new NIAC program, the NASA Institute for Advanced Concepts, right? In the past, that program, people would write rather short proposals. in the past, it was all done external, and people would write rather short proposals. The proposals were sent in to NIAC, and they had an external team of, I think they called them superstars. These were people that had done this kind of work in the past that would review those proposals, and they'd have to pass through that gate, and then the NIAC director would make the selections from there. Okay? And we're looking at a similar process here this time, except for the way we staff that peer review team is going to be a little bit different. One of the things I have to my advantage now is I have the center chief technologists, okay, who are going to be, while they are at a center, are going to be away from the bid and proposal process, separated from the bid and proposal process, so that they can help me in the peer review. We also, by the way, have at our disposal a number of organizations, including the fellows at the NESC, I should call out. Right? The fellows at the NESC are well established in various disciplines. And for something like the Space Technology Research Grant Program, which you could think of as a disciplinary program, you can imagine involving some of the NESC technical fellows and the community that they feed into the peer review process as well. So the best ideas, you're right, it's very dependent on your peer reviewers, and that's why we're spending so much time making sure that we identify the right peer reviewers for the right program. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take one more from headquarters, and then we'll go to the centers.
I think this is related to both of the previous questions. If I understand correctly, the SMD solicitation process inherits a lot from the decadal surveys. And I'm curious if there's an analog to the science decadal surveys for technology.
Yeah, so the analog would be the technology road mapping activities for this program. At NASA, the NASA technology road mapping activities. Now, one of the functions of my office is to actually perform that technology road mapping. I didn't have time to talk about it, but we are getting started on that process. It's something that we're going to update on something like a 4-year cycle. So it's a little quicker than the decadal survey, but it's in that standard, if you will. And the last time this was done, it was done in about the 2004 timeframe, right after the Aldridge Commission report came out. There were 16 technology areas identified. I think it was, I was out of the agency at that time. I think it was APIO that ran that activity. So those reports all exist, actually. And we're using those as a starting point for kicking off this new activity. And so if you think about those APIO reports or an improved version, an updated and improved version of those APIO reports, as a form of a decadal survey kind of input, then we do have that to inform our grand challenges and to inform our solicitations. Thanks.
Okay, we'll now take a question from the Glenn Research Center.
Hello, good afternoon, Mr. Braun. This is Dr. Shantaram Pai speaking from NASA Glenn Research Center in Cleveland, Ohio. I have a 3-part question and one cautionary note. First of all, you talked about big NASA Space Act, and you mentioned R&D competency level, flight hardware development, mission operations core competency. Now, I would like to see how you are relating those 3 points to technology readiness level, game-changing, and cross-cutting technologies on a one-to-one basis. Second, you talked a lot about physics-based. Do we have any database from the presently Constellation project or anything where we still need answers to some new technology using physics? Third, how does it change the existing NASA goal 3F, which is understand the effects of space and so on? Lastly, the cautionary note is we have done similar thing under the NGLT program. We competed among ourselves, among our centers, and lesson learned from that will be very useful. Again, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the question. I will try to address all the parts that I can remember. First of all, your first part was about the 3 longstanding core competencies. I cannot map those 3 longstanding core competencies to the 3 divisions, okay, because all 3 of those divisions relate to research and technology. Okay? Research and technology, in my view, spans a TRL of 1 up to something like 6. So it includes fundamental work, ground-based and lab test work, and proving things in a relevant environment. I will tell you that all 3 of those long-standing core competencies are important, and you can imagine that if we did not have a vibrant, strong investment in research and technology, you can imagine the kinds of programs, flight hardware and mission operations programs, that one would be able to do in the future. They would be, in my view, they'd be a little more incremental, if you will. And you can also imagine that without the flight hardware or mission operations pull, we would end up spending all our time in the proverbial technology sandbox, which is also not what NASA is about. So all 3 of those long-standing core competencies, I think, are important. But within OCT, the divisions and programs within the Office of the Chief Technologist are focused on research and technology. Another part of your question had to do with physics-based, fundamental physics and investments therein in the Constellation program. I can point to a number of things there. I could talk about the launch abort system, for example. The one I know the most about is the investments that were made in heat shield technology. This was not actually made within Constellation. It was made within ESMD in support of Constellation. But there was an advanced development project. It was led out of NASA Ames Research Center. It involved many of the NASA centers, including Glenn. And they matured 8 ablative TPS materials from 5 different commercial vendors. And the reason this investment was made was, frankly, at the beginning of the program, NASA had not done much in ablative thermal protection system materials in a long time. And the fundamental physics of ablative thermal protection materials was not well known. And so through analysis and through a lot of ground-based testing, these 8 different materials were matured. There were down selects along the way. There were 2 materials that were brought all the way up for consideration for flight on Orion. One of them was ultimately selected AVCO, or a reformulated AVCO, was ultimately selected for flight on Orion. The reason this is important to me is that the other one, the one that was not selected, which was a tiled Pica heat shield, something that had been developed through this program, this ESMD program, is now going to fly on the Mars Science Laboratory. In fact, in a parallel development in this same slice of time, the Mars Science Laboratory ran into some challenges with its heat shield. And because of the investments in technology that ESMD had been making, tiled Pica was an option that the MSL project could consider. They considered it in their own right. They did the design and development on their own, and it's now going to fly to Mars. Essentially a 5-meter diameter heat shield is going to fly to Mars, launched in 2010 and landing in 2012, essentially. And this development wouldn't have been possible. This use by the SMD on the Mars Science Lab wouldn't have been possible without the investment in fundamental physics made years earlier by ESMD. And so I think it is a useful example of that kind of investment paying off for the agency. So your question on the agency's strategic goals, I'm going to have to come back to it another time because I want to make sure we get to all the questions.
Okay, we're going to hop out to the Jet Propulsion Lab where we have 2 questions.
Hi, Bobby. I wanted to ask you, are there going to be concept studies developed for human missions to asteroids and Mars orbit and Lagrangian points, and will they be tied in with the technology program?
Yeah, there will definitely be concept studies for all the human exploration destinations. That work is actually ongoing. It's been started. It's being run not by my organization. It's being run through the HEF team, the Human Exploration Frameworks team. And they're basically looking at a wide range of design reference missions, if you will, that span the range of destinations and dates given in the President's speech and different implementation approaches for meeting those destinations and dates. And that team, by the way, is sponsored by ESMD. I have a representative on that team, representing technology, if you will, and I'm actually serving on the steering council for the HEF team, but that work is being done within HEFT, within ESMD. Okay.
Thank you for taking my question. My name is Ernest Robinson. I'm a retired aerospace engineer with a background in nuclear propulsion in the early career. I want to focus on the issue of the nuclear thermal rocket. Based on NASA's outstanding accomplishments, the nuclear rocket could be flight qualified fairly quickly and as recommended by the DR 5.0. Flight opportunities, unmanned flight opportunities for the nuclear rocket are possible with the Mars Science Sample Return mission and also with the proposed mission to ANEO. This is achievable, game-changing and cross-cutting technology that enables an affordable piloted mission to Mars, one that the logistics of which could be supported by Shuttle C. So my question is, will NASA seriously consider the nuclear rocket within the current round of RFIs in enabling technology and flagship demonstrations, and therefore should we proceed to form up our multi-agency team and submit a proposal to flight qualify the nuclear rocket? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so nuclear rockets are in the ESMD plans. In fact, if you're in Galveston as part of the industry days that are going on out there, you'll probably hear a little bit about that. Within ETDD, Exploration Technology Development and Demonstrator Program, there are some investments being made in advanced propulsion, and that advanced propulsion investments cut across, split, I guess you'd say, and cut across both low thrust propulsion and high thrust propulsion with in-space propulsion. And within the high thrust, we're certainly looking at nuclear again. We're looking at it technically. I personally am excited about looking at it technically. What the political and social economic ramifications of that are kind of downstream of us at this point. But from a technical perspective, it should certainly be considered, as you have stated. I personally don't think it's related to Mars sample return. I do think it's related to human exploration to a wide variety of destinations, and therefore needs to be considered.
Okay, thanks. We'll now head out to NASA Langley for a question.
Good afternoon, Dr. Braun. I'm Donner Grigsby. I was wondering if you would share your views about anything that your organization may be doing to break down some of the other barriers to proposal submission, one of them being the qualifications of the team or individual submitting it, which has derailed me, and others being that's not work that your center typically does.
Oh, okay. Well, so part of the proposal process will involve evaluation of the team that submits the proposal, qualifications of the team that submits the proposal. But at least within my program, there's going to be no, that's not something that your organization should be doing kind of feedback. this is best ideas from wherever the best ideas may come. Okay, I think I've said that 3 times. I mean it. So I don't think you'll get that kind of feedback from the space technology program. But certainly we want to consider the qualifications of the team that is submitting the proposal, because when you select an activity, you want to have assurances that that activity will come to fruition.
Okay, thanks. We'll now come back here to headquarters for any final questions here. Up here in the front. Could you hold for a microphone, please? We've got one coming.
Mickey King. I'm the Mission Directorate Representative on the SBIR activities for ESMD. So I've been involved for the last 3 or 4 years in the SBIR program. But one thing, I've been doing a lot of thinking on my own, exclusive of that activity, of what are the real barriers to us accomplishing some of the things we want to accomplish in terms of space exploration. And of course, the first one you can easily define is low-cost access to space. And that's a killer. I mean, I've looked at all kinds of concepts. You're not going to get more out of chemical propulsion than you're getting out of it now. I worked in that field for 25 years before I started here. So, and in those 40 years total, our advances in ISP were a few seconds. So we're not going any further with that. So I try to look at some alternative concepts, such as power beaming, with use of a hydrogen tank on the vehicle. You heat the hydrogen, you get maybe an ISP of 1,000. Anyway, I'm diverging a little bit here, but my curiosity is somebody sitting there trying to start from a viewpoint of what is it that NASA needs to accomplish a lot of its future goals, and trying to define what technologies you got to work on that basis.
Yeah. So you, in a nutshell, you just defined my job. Thank you. So when I talk about these grand challenges, right, where do these grand challenges come from? You might start with NASA's strategic plan, right, which includes things like low-cost access to space. And you might flow from that strategic plan to capabilities that NASA seeks, and then solicit ideas, solicit technological solutions to fulfill those capabilities, okay? I agree with what you're saying, in particular about the importance of low-cost access to space and the difficulty in achieving it. Both of those statements, I think, are factually correct. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try, right? And we can try a number of different ways. So there are investments being made in ESMD in the heavy lift program, for example. Maybe not to improve ISP so much, but to provide a larger system to lift more payload into orbit. There are certainly also investments we can make in in-space propulsion or in propellant transfer and storage capabilities, because 80% of these vehicles that we're talking about for a Mars mission or for a near-Earth object human mission is propellant, right? And so having a propellant depot or something like that that's operational would be, could be a big swinger here. So we have basically right now within ESMD alone, there are 3 parallel paths that all affect not getting to low Earth orbit, but getting out, right? Heavy lift investments, in-space propulsion, and propellant transfer and storage. In addition to that, within my office, we have a small amount of funding to invest in longer-term solutions, like your power beaming example. Another example would be nanoenergetics, which is a very high thrust, it's not an ISP benefit, but it's for cargo, for lifting cargo up effectively. It also has some national security implications. So we could do that in partnership with some other government agencies. So while we make investments in what we might think of as nearer term approaches that could get to the capabilities we need, we can also invest, we also need to keep an eye to the future and make, I would say, smaller investments, but certainly non-zero investments in those long-term, more visionary approaches. And we're doing that within my office.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question here in the front.
Hi, Bobby. I'm Darren Skelly with Booz Allen Hamilton. Question for you is around culture. We do a lot of support, excuse me, with DARPA, ARPA-E, and IARPA. And one of the things that makes them so successful, as you well know based on your experience, is that acceptance of failure. And changing to a culture where NASA is so success-oriented and so driven to meet the requirements, how are you going to allow, or how are you going to help this organization more where failure is an acceptable answer to really get those game-changing and innovative technologies?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. That's something that I've been focused on since the day I came back to NASA, okay? And you're absolutely right. If failure is not an option is the mantra for the whole agency, including our technology program, then we're not going to take large steps. We're going to take, small steps towards the future. So what I've been advocating for, and by the way, the administrator will probably be talking about this rather shortly. It's something that he's very attuned to, is a tiered approach to acceptable risk, what we as an agency define as acceptable risk. Obviously, for our human spaceflight systems, where safety is job one, there's a very high risk threshold, right? Or a very low, risk threshold. As you go maybe and you look at some of the flagship missions that the Science Mission Directorate accomplishes, these are very large investments financially, and failure in one of those investments, would be significant for the agency. So maybe no lives are lost, so maybe it's a step down from what we do in human spaceflight, but it's not a very significant step down. It's just a modest step down. But as you look at maybe the smaller missions that SMD and within ESMD that the robotic scouts might look at, we should actually encourage our people to take more risk, and we should applaud them when they do. And as you step away from the missions into the technology program, it's absolutely essential that we take risk. The game-changing development program within technology is where we can take that risk, and it's where we will take that risk. We've been talking about what you might consider to be rather low success rates. Now, the important thing there is that when we fail, notice I didn't say if we fail, I said when we fail, because we will. When we fail, we can't fail because of incompetence, right? We can't fail because we made some sign error, right, in an equation somewhere or something like that. But it has to be acceptable to fail because we reached so far and we just missed, right? As long as we gather the lessons learned from that failure, it's not really a failure. An example that I have for you is I worked on a program at JPL once through the New Millennium program, actually. It was called the DS2 Mars Microprobes. And there were maybe a handful of us that designed this aeroshell. It was a single-stage entry system, meaning it had no deployables, had no parachute, nothing like that. It was just an aeroshell that came through it was designed to go through the atmosphere of Mars and hit the ground actually supersonically, and in place a penetrator into the subsurface of Mars. The whole mission was $25 million, and it was carried to Mars by another spacecraft that actually failed as well, the Mars Polar Lander. And when it got to Mars, I told you, it failed, okay? And it was written off as a failure. Well, that same team of people then worked on something called the Mars Sample Return Earth Entry Vehicle, which is a single-stage entry system that is designed to bring samples back from Mars and fly through the Earth's atmosphere and land safely, perhaps at a place like the Utah desert or another range like that. The Mars Sample Return is one of the premier missions within the Science Mission Directorate. And the technology that we're using, that we're planning to use many years from now, in the return of those samples is based on the technology developed through the Mars microprobes, through the DS-2 mission. So I might ask, was the DS-2 mission really a failure? Or was that $25 million just an investment in knowledge and expertise and experience that could deliver this new system, right? And that's the way you need to think about the technology program, is that even when we fail, we need to be on a pathway towards something bigger, and we need to make progress towards something bigger. And then when we fail, it's okay, right? A couple weeks ago, DARPA flew a Mach 20 hypersonic vehicle. It was on the front page of the papers. DARPA set speed record, right, with its Mach 20 vehicle. What was, like down in paragraph 8 or something, it said the vehicle was lost and not recovered. You know, basically, after it flew Mach 20, they had a control issue and they lost the vehicle. If that was NASA, how do you think it would have been reported? Right? Which would have been the headline and which would have been in paragraph 8. And what I'm saying is we need to change that game. We, NASA, need to say, hey, we're a cutting edge agency. And if we're a cutting edge agency, we're going to take risk. Where we can take that risk is in our technology program. And we're going to do it. And not everything is going to be a glorified success, but we will learn from every one of our technology programs. I think that's the key. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bobby. We've run out of time, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Again, for the slides that Bobby talked about earlier in the program, if you go to www.nasa.gov/offices/oct/index.html, again, nasa.gov/offices/oct/index.html, you'll be able to download all of his slides that he talked to earlier. And thank you all for coming today.